Chapter 21. Stalking with the Double. Emilito took me to the most beautiful Spanish colonial house I had ever seen, other than Clara's. Outside, it had a plain facade, with bars on the windows and several second-story balconies overlooking the streets below. The balcony I admired from the plaza was laden with pot geraniums and thick green ferns. Whoever lives here loves plants, was the feeling that came to me as we entered through the massive 12-paneled door. Inside the courtyard was cool and dark. It reminded me of a cloister from another era. Columns and arches lined stone walkways. Raised beds framed a small orchid with fruit trees. Portions of the high walls were covered with honeysuckle and hanging wisteria growing up trellises. Cool stone benches were flanked with flowers growing in ceramic pots with a marbleized bluish-green glaze, and out of a stone planter grew a huge agave cactus. To one side was a dark hallway which led to a small garden patio. A high-backed carved wooden bench was set against the wall, and a beautiful jacaranda tree shaded the rectangular enclosure. To the side was a stone grotto, with a slender waterfall flowing into a tiny pool. The house and grounds seemed to me the most peaceful place on earth. From time to time I could hear the flurry of birds, but even when they were hushed and subdued as if out of respect for the sanctity of the house. To think that this oasis of tranquility existed in the heart of a busy cosmopolitan city seemed in itself an act of power. "Sit on this bench and wait for the lady of the house to show herself," Emilito suggested. "Now that I've delivered you, I'll be on my way." Wait, Emilito. I don't know the lady of the house. Won't you stay and introduce me to her?" "Of course you know her," Emilito said, surprised. "You met her in Sonora. Her name is Zuleika." At the mention of her name, I remembered the lady at the fiesta who had given me the coca to drink for the flea bites. She had wanted me to stay with her, but I had declined. I had no idea she lived in such beautiful surroundings. "But what should I do when I meet her?" I asked. Emilito gave me a stern look. "When you meet her, be impeccable," he advised. "That's all anyone can do." Before I could ask him what would impeccability mean in this situation, he left through a side door leading off the corridor. I sat on the bench, feeling forlorn, watching the fish playing in the pond. The harmony of that house and the ripples in the water soon made me feel drowsy, but in a pleasant way. I exhaled a few times, and with my breath, all my concerns seemed to flow out until there was nothing left but a profound sense of well-being. I closed my eyes and listened to the water running over the small rocks, and imagined seeing the tiny goldfish that by now had hid under some water plants. If only this waiting dream would last forever, I heard a woman's voice say. I turned and looked into the dark corridor, but saw no one. But those words summed up in me the moment, for that is exactly how I felt. "That's right, dear. Rest, and let the sound of the water take you where it will." The voice came from my left, very near. Startled, I opened my eyes to see a tall lady wearing a black flowing caftan with an Indian motif around a stand-up collar. Her auburn hair was piled high in a pleasing, although somewhat old-fashioned hairdo. The skin of her face was taut, and her eyebrows arched expressively with the aid of an eyebrow pencil. Her mouth was thin and delicate, and her eyes were fixed on me in such a piercing manner that I knew it was Zulika. She could hypnotize me with her gaze if she wanted to, I thought. But somehow I didn't mind. I trusted her, for at a deep level, we were alike. Then the realization surfaced as to how we were alike, and that made me uneasy. We were both quite a bit crazy and had to use all our energy to make a coherent presentation of ourselves in the face of utter chaos. "You're not afraid of me, are you?" Zulika asked solicitously. "Because I assure you, I'm here to help you." "I'm not afraid," I said and meant it. Zulika was so far beyond the pettiness of the world that she exuded strength and vitality in her voice and movements. Except for her burning eyes, she was the picture of calmness and serenity. "You're going to stay with me for a while, and I'm going to teach you how to stalk with your dreaming body," she said. "But I still haven't finished recapitulating," I said. "Shouldn't I continue with that?" Recapitulating is important, but so is dreaming. I have to set you up in the proper manner now because there is so little time. Then you can practice on your own. While you are here, however, you have to follow my instructions. Agreed? I had no choice but to nod my head in agreement, for she was nodding hers. "Dreaming and gazing go hand in hand," Zulika began. "You already caught on to that when you gazed at the ripples in the pond. Now, let the sound of the water take you. That's how you start. You find something in the world that shimmers or has a glow to it, and you gaze at it. Then you find a sound like rain, water from a stream. Even the noise of the city will do, and you follow the sounds. Then you transfer it into your dreams by gazing in your dreams or hearing that sound in your sleep." I knew what she meant. For once, I had a rock tumbler that made a terrible rattling noise. Since I had to keep it on 24 hours a day for the stones to be polished as they collided against each other in the tumbler, I could hear that noise in my sleep. I remember that noise would take me places I didn't want to go. So I finally had to turn off the machine at night. "There are exercises you can do to move your awareness to the other side," Zulika said. "The other side?" "To your dreaming body." She spoke in such a soft, melodic voice that it calmed me just to listen to her. "When you sleep, you must allow your dreaming body to become aware, conscious of itself. You do this by first looking at your hands, and then by getting up out of your bed to move around. Or you can find anything else you wish, such as the item you gaze at during the day, or something in particular you wish to find. In other words, your dream body must respond to your commands. To stalk with a double is to control your movements in a specific endeavor and not expend all your energy in one crazy outburst. "How does one expend one's energy?" I asked. "Gradually, harmoniously. Try to prolong your dreaming endeavor as long as possible, but always reserve energy so you can wake up and you don't get lost in places you won't be able to come back from. Now, I will show you a specific few exercises you can practice." She placed the cushion on the floor in front of a low wrought iron table and told me to sit comfortably, crossing my legs if I wished. In the center of the table, she placed a short blue candle and lit it. After flickering for a while, the yellow flame formed a perfect, unwavering oval. Zulika gently blew on the flame, causing it to leap sideways for an instant. When the current of air had passed, the flame straightened out and became calm again. I watched Zulika intently, for I knew there was a lesson in what she was doing. There are two sides to everything, she said, sitting down in a high-backed cane chair. And that includes the mind. On the one hand, it can think, reason, and reflect upon itself in order to create and draw conclusions. The other quality of the mind is to be silent, inactive, and without thought. We all know how to reason and reflect upon ourselves, but to achieve silence is more difficult. Without getting up, she blew on the flame again. I was surprised to see that the flame leaped as it had done before. The mind is like a flame. It flares up at the slightest disturbance and flutters the moment a breeze touches it, she said. Thoughts and desires are like gusts of air. They activate the mind and make it flutter. In a clear tone, she explained that there are two approaches to achieving mental rest. She stood and placed her hand around the flame to form a partial shield, then blew at it again. This time the flame, being protected by her hand, did not flicker. One approach to silence and rest is to shield the mind from outside disturbances that can unsettle it. You do this by removing yourself from the disruptive or injurious forces that threaten your well-being. In other words, you withdraw and hide yourself in your depths. The second method, Zulika said, was more difficult to accomplish, for it involved a delicate maneuver of shielding the mind, not from outside influences, but from its own influence. In this case, since the disturbing stimuli comes from within, there is no way to run or retreat into the self, for the mind itself is agitated and running. Therefore, one has to stop one's agitation by fixing the mind to some point, such as an image, idea, or sound, and in this way render it immobile. Quietude is the product of discipline and training, Zulika said. It involves stopping the internal dialogue by focusing on a single point, or by expanding awareness to merge with the great silence that exists beyond the limits of thought. As I listened to her talk, I felt a quietness settle about me, as if it came not from her words, but from her very being. To be unperturbed means that nothing can pull your attention away from its center, she said, sensing my mood. One of the best methods to achieve this is by gazing at a light or a luminous object. She asked me if I had understood the two approaches for resting the mind, which she said were really methods of gazing. When I hesitated, she repeated them. In the first instance, the body and mind are removed from the disturbing stimuli by retreating or moving away from it. This can be accomplished because the disruptive forces come from the outside. In the second instance, the body and mind are set firm because the disturbances arise from within one's own being. It's best to use a combination of both methods, retreat and fixation, she said. That is why you are here in this quiet house where no one bothers you. While you are learning these gazing techniques, you must retreat from the outside world, but you must also retreat from the world you carry inside you by fixing your mind through gazing practices. What does fixing the mind actually do? I asked. Only a fixed or centered mind allows you the freedom to come and go as you please. I told her I didn't understand how a fixed mind could allow one to move about. It seemed to be a contradiction. Zulika carefully picked up the candle and slowly moved it from side to side so that the flame did not waver, but different areas of the table were illuminated. Notice that the flame does not flicker, and yet it moves about. A fixed and steady awareness allows you to see into anything, to move in any direction, without becoming agitated by what you see or do. Therefore, you are able to come and go anywhere and still be in control. Zulika set the candle on the table so that the flame was just at the level of my eyes. If your mind is not fixed and your thoughts jump around, whatever you see will pull you and affect your awareness. Then you will have to struggle to extricate yourself before you are free to move on to something else. And in no time at all, you will have so many ties that you won't be able to move at all. What will happen then? You will have to recapitulate your acts to free your energy, she said. That's why we recommend that one always recapitulates the events of the day so that one is freed of their influence and one does not build up energetic bonds. Zulika stressed that recalling the events of my life, combined with the sweeping breath I had learned, could clean not only past ties, but also maintain awareness in a fluid condition every moment of the day. Once freed, the awareness can be focused and used at the service of intent, or the spirit that rules us and gives us life. We must use our awareness to liberate awareness, she said. Just as we use a needle to take out a splinter in a finger. Now, enough explanation. Let's get down to practice. Zulika instructed me to gaze at the candle for a moment, then to place the palms of my hands over my eyes and visualize the flame. For a while I looked at the flame, then closed my eyes and covered them with my palms. I could see a chartreuse circle. Then a golden flame appeared, which turned into a bright red-orange glow. Soon the flame was replaced by a small black opening that formed in front of my eyes. Zulika told me to repeat the exercise of gazing at the flame, then covering my eyes with my palms. This time, the reddish light seemed to be moving to my right. and it was difficult to keep it centered in my inner field of vision. She said I should try to move the image of the flame closer and further away from me, while keeping my eyes covered with my palms. After a while, I was able to hold the image of the flame and move it further away or bring it closer to me using the force of my mind. This gazing practice will help you to develop your focusing ability, Zulika said when I opened my eyes again. Just as the sorcery passes strengthen your energetic body, your mental control can be sharpened through gazing techniques. She added that visualizing a light not only quiets the thoughts, but it also activates a fundamental energy center in the back of the head, invigorating the entire body. She remarked that with continued practice, I would no longer need to gaze at a candle, but would be able to see the flame simply by closing my eyes. The light, once fixed, would help me to concentrate on a single point, to the exclusion of all other influences. This is one way of resting the mind, Zulika said. Even though you are actively concentrating, your mind is at rest because it is not dispersed in 1,000 directions. The most invigorating form of rest, she explained, is not passive sleep in which a person is at the mercy of disturbing dreams, but a controlled, active concentration in which one is attending only the invigorating light in front of the eyes. She recommended that I stand up and walk around for a while to loosen my limbs before going on to the second gazing exercise. When I had again sat down on the cushion, I saw that Zulika had placed a large black crow's feather on top of the table. Now I'll show you another way of resting the mind, she said. Sit quietly, breathe naturally, and without any thoughts, gaze at the feather. She said that I was to focus my attention on the feather until it and I merged. She said it was possible to merge with any object one was gazing at, so that it was no longer a separate entity, but something alive and part of one's own energetic being. How is that possible? I asked. Everyone knows the world is made up of separate objects. Zulika arched an eyebrow. Is it really? She asked. Objects are only separate when we think about them. When we gaze at them, they merge in a single field of energy, which also includes our energetic bodies. She looked at me to see if I comprehended what she said. I must have given her a dumb look, for she added, I have just revealed a sorcery secret, and you insist on taking it as an ordinary statement. Think about what I said. I was silent for a moment. It still looks like an ordinary feather to me, I said stubbornly. Zulika shook her head. The here and there are one. The there and here are one. Nothing is separate from anything. As I gazed at the feather, I noticed that my breathing became slower, more rhythmical. It had lowered down into my abdomen. My thoughts faded, and I was immersed in a profound silence. It seemed that Zulika was right. At one point, the feather was aware and observing me. It radiated energy at me as if it were conscious of my watching it. I had the distinct certainty that if intended, I could make the feather lift off the table and float in the air, for we were energetically linked. After a while, Zulika told me to move my head in small circles to rest my eyes. They had begun to tear from the strain of staring at the feather. She explained that the point of the gazing was not to stare fixedly at an object, but to let the eyes gently caress the object, so that, responding to one's feelings, it opens up and emanates its own feeling and knowledge. It is a merging of both feelings from the gazer and the object that results in a common blending of awareness and a sense of mutual trust and affection, Zulika said. She further elaborated that this feeling of openness and empathy is the result of stopping one's internal dialogue and of allowing one's inner sensibility to spill forth and merge with whatever one is gazing at. Pick any object that is pleasing to you, Zulika said. Never gaze at anything that is unpleasant or frightening. Why is that? Because through steadfast gazing, you open centers in your energetic body, and the energy of the object will enter inside you. By the same token, if you are not in an agreeable mood, you should not inflict your negative feelings on the objects around you by concentrating on them, regardless of whether they are rocks, feathers, or people. I rested my eyes by making circles with my nose, first in a clockwise, then in a counterclockwise direction. When I realized again, Zulika gave me a third exercise for fixing the mind, one which involved visualizing a shape or form. What kind of a form should I visualize? I asked. Any pleasing shape will do, she replied. She picked up my drawing pad and inscribed a circle. In its center, she drew a smaller circle and shaded it black. She said that a circle was always pleasing to visualize because it represented the completeness of the universe, from which nothing could be added or taken away. To visualize a circle, she said, filled one with a sense of fullness and well-being that was needed for a joyous journey. Zulika told me to close my eyes, and moving in a clockwise direction, slowly and smoothly draw a circle with my mind. Then my inner feeling was to leap into the center of the circle and momentarily rest there. Then I was to fix my attention at the top and begin inscribing the circle again and repeat the procedure of pushing through the center of it. Zulika explained that the circular motion of the eyes, as well as mentally leaping into the circle's center, should be repeated until I could do it with great concentration. I found this exercise more difficult to do than the last one. It made me drowsy. I began to yawn and fidget. When gazing at an inner or outer shape, one must not become agitated or let one's thoughts roam, Zulika warned. If they do, immediately bring your attention back to your task. She explained that leaping into the circle's center had a very powerful effect on the energy points located behind the eyes. Pushing into the center of the circle helped to open the passageway or door to the other world. What's on the other side? I wanted to know. Zulika hesitated. Perhaps everything. Perhaps nothing. Soon you will see for yourself. She suggested I continue inscribing circles in order to still and strengthen the mind. She assured me that by gently yet firmly pushing to the center, I would develop a steadfastness and imperturbability that were indispensable for journeying with the energy body. After I practiced the technique several more times, Zulika stood up and told me to select one of the 3 techniques she had shown me and practice it while she attended to some affairs. I decided to gaze at the lighted candle. Somehow I found the smooth yellow flame appealing. When I closed my eyes, I could still see the flame and practiced moving it back and forth and to the side. It seemed that only moments had passed when Zulika returned and told me to blow out the candle. Whenever the mind is agitated or unsettled, be sure to do one of these exercises, she advised. The golden flame, once fixed in your mind, will shine through the fog like a beacon from the other side. Once fixed, even if your eyes are closed, it will be there in front of you to calm your heart. We sat in almost total darkness, for the sun had already set, and she had not yet lit the outdoor lanterns. Why is it important to quiet the mind? I asked. If you link your actions to the level of profound silence, Zulika said, you will have accomplished a delicate feat, that of action through inaction or not doing. Once one learns to harness the energy of not doing, one can become truly powerful. She further explained that in order to accomplish anything, we needed an unbending intent that gives one's acts direction and purpose, as well as a refined and subtle awareness that gives one's acts power. She stressed that only a refined and subtle awareness will allow us to reach beyond the world of form and enter the energy layers of the other realms. She leaned closer on her chair and said in a low tone, "Now I will reveal the second of the sorcerer's secrets. When you practice gazing, you are really practicing dreaming while you are awake." Again, she looked at me to see if I understood her meaning. You are focusing the energy of intent, which is abstraction itself, and are moving away from the physical level into the realm of pure energy. She explained that intent is the force that holds things together, gives them order and power. Gazing awakens the underlying awareness sorcerers call intent. That force that enables us to perceive and links our body directly to it. It is also this firm and unbending force called intent that distinguishes acts of power from the shallow, arbitrary acts of everyday life. Through gazing, your physical body is gradually transformed so that it matches your mental vitality. Finally, the body becomes so light that it is rendered into sheer energy. When this happens, one is dreaming with the totality of oneself. All one has to do is to intend something, and the body will perceive it. This happens because one has linked oneself to intent and is dreaming oneself using the power of creation itself. Gazing techniques were designed by sorcerers of antiquity to arrive at this subtle manipulation of perception. Zulika picked up the feather and let it fall gently onto the table. Practice gazing, and you will eventually purify your body so that it will become as light as this feather, she said. When your body becomes transformed into pure energy like your mind, there will be no difference between what you think and what you are. The here and there of space and time will merge into a single awareness of now, and your mind and body will no longer be separate, but a single energetic unit of being here. As she talked, I sensed someone else watching us from the darkness of the corridor. At first, I only caught a glimpse of a shape. Then I saw him standing there, as if eavesdropping on our conversation or observing my practice. I had noticed him earlier and had kept turning my head to see if the man was still there. I assumed it was someone living in that house, for the house was large with many rooms. Zulika smiled. It's not time to meet him yet, but you will soon when you are more invisible. For now, concentrate on your practices. Who is that man? I asked, alarmed. The one who makes the darkness respond, she said. Respond to what? To his bidding, to his intent. He is the master of intent. When you learn to stalk with a double, he will come and show you his art. Can't I meet him now? I asked. She laughed and said I was in no condition to meet anyone in my present energetic state, and it would take a great deal of energy to interact with the master of intent. In the darkness, you sense him. He will speak to your double directly. When you reach the point of silent knowledge, he will guide you, and you will know. What will I know? I can't tell you that. You will simply know directly. And if anyone asks you, you yourself will not be able to say what it is that you know. It will be too deep, too vast for words. You will try to remember, but you won't be able to think of it, because what you know is so far removed from thought that words will fail you. Then what good is it? I asked. If I won't remember what he teaches me, or if I won't be able to say what it is, what's the point of knowing anything? You will make things happen, she said. You will cause the darkness to move and manifest itself in light. For a while, I tried to figure out what she meant. And then I suddenly knew. For, as Emelito had warned me, someone had already been showing me how to stalk with the double. I didn't know what Zulika meant, but I knew that I already knew. The certainty came to me that the master of intent had been teaching me all along. The closest way I could explain it was that he had been setting up something in an area that was beyond my waking attention, beyond even my dreams. It was a place where no dreams existed, and yet energy flowed unimpeded by thoughts, or wishes, or even images arising in sleep. With that realization, the man stepped out of the shadows. I was not too surprised to see that it was the same man I had encountered at the border crossing in Nogales. The one who had made me faint by pushing my upper back, and the one I had seen again in La Catalina's house when she had pointed out the window to her protector. He seemed to know me also, and yet I had laid eyes on him only twice, as far as I could recollect. He nodded perfunctorily from a distance. I avoided his gaze, for I remembered what happened the last time I looked into his eyes. He said nothing, and I knew there was nothing to be said. But the pressure of his presence made my thoughts stop, and the muscles of my arms and legs swell as a current of energy passed through me. I could hear the air around me buzzing. I breathed heavily, taking in gobs of air through my mouth. Then I felt the back of my neck pop as he came, or rather, drifted closer. I saw his mouth move. He was saying something, but I couldn't hear him. It was a silent sound, and I was being pushed away by that voiceless whisper. I fell backwards onto the bench and had to hold on to dear life so I wouldn't pass out. Then I felt the top of my head open and something shoot out so violently that I ended up in San Francisco. I knew it was San Francisco because I could see the Golden Gate Bridge. I was soaring over the choppy gray waters and could see where the rust-colored paint was peeling off the massive iron girdles held up by cables. Then I was flying around skyscrapers, large office buildings with dark glass windows. I flew very hard so I wouldn't get trapped between the buildings, which had strong air currents circling around them. I could hear the deafening roar the air conditioning units on the top of the buildings made. I did not like that area one bit. It was so menacing that I became frightened. The shadows of the tall buildings on the streets below made the scene dark and ominous. I could hear a horrible sound. I looked and knew it was a helicopter, and I was being sucked into the propeller blade. For the wind was horrendously strong, and I could not fight against it. I made a supreme effort to pull away using every bit of my energy in my womb. Then I felt myself sucked into a long tunnel by a cord that was attached to my body somewhere at the other end. I was pulled south through different terrain, zooming below me at a fantastic speed. I saw, or rather sensed, the scenery changing from cities to desert to cities and lakes as I covered thousands of geographical miles in mere seconds. When the rushing stopped, I found myself back in Guadalajara, in the patio, slumped on the bench of Zulika's house. I opened my eyes and found Zulika staring at me. I told her where I had been, She was not pleased to hear of my travels. You expend all your energy in one uncontrolled outburst. You traveled a great distance for nothing, and to what avail? I don't know what happened, I said. The Master of Darkness loaned you some of his energy, and you wasted it in a cross-country joyride. That's what happened. I hope you at least enjoyed the sights. I shook my head. It all zoomed by too fast, like a movie played at an ultra-fast speed. I just got glimpses of water and deserts and buildings and many cities below. Glimpses, glimpses. What good are glimpses? Zulika said. We are after control. You have a great deal of work ahead of you before you can use your stalking techniques to control your flying or whatever you choose to do with your dreaming body. So practice. Practice. She left me alone in the darkness so I could continue practicing the gazing exercises. Chapter 22. The Other Side. After several weeks of practicing the gazing and dreaming techniques Zulika had taught me, I felt a strange silence settle over me. I was no longer in a hurry. I had no appointments to keep, nowhere to go, and no one to talk to. I seldom saw Carlos or Don Juan. And when our paths did cross, they usually avoided me. I could move freely on the ground floor of Zulika's house and in the patios and garden, but I was not allowed upstairs or outside the compound. My food was brought to me by a servant, and I slept in a high platform for which I needed a stepladder to climb into. During the day, I worked on some sketches. Drawing, I realized, was really another form of gazing. It allowed me to spend hours in total silence without getting bored. At night, I practiced finding my hands in my dreams, moving about without shifting the scene, locating certain objects Zulika had specified beforehand, and giving myself commands in my dreams. That I would carry out with as much detail as possible. One evening, I was gazing at the ripples in the pond. It was twilight, and the small patio was a mass of dense shadows. Everything was so still that I thought I could hear whispering on the other side of the house. I again sensed a person lurking in the darkness. But this time, the man abruptly came out of the shadows and stood before me. I recognized him as the master of intent. But before I could say anything, he vanished in a flurry of ripples that began with his feet and undulated upward to encompass the top of his head. To my astonishment, he had actually vibrated himself into non-existence right before my eyes. He melted into the darkness as mysteriously as he had appeared. Before I could become too frightened, Zulika came and sat beside me on the bench. The master of intent just showed you how to merge with the darkness, she said. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Be one with the night. Become invisible as he is. I felt something inside me struggle, resist. I did not want to be invisible. I wanted to be recognized and noticed. I was tired of being overlooked. I wished other people would help me get rid of my moroseness and quandaries, not ignore me even more. The memory of my grammar school classmates teasing me and my teachers criticizing me because I did not speak English unsettled me. My classmates would say, "What's the matter? A cat got your tongue?" and take turns pulling my pigtails. Then they left me to brood on a bench while they ran off to play jump rope or kickball. I vowed then that I would get the attention I felt I deserved and no longer would be a frightened nobody. My whole life's endeavor was a struggle to fulfill that ambition. Now Zulika was telling me to become invisible and be a silent, unseen nobody again. A stalker's training is in the art of being invisible, Zulika whispered, as if following the drift of my thoughts. A stalker makes herself unobtrusive in all situations and never calls attention to herself. Never? I said, remembering the fortune cookie I once had that said, "There is only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about." It was true. It was easier to be criticized or insulted than to be ignored, overlooked. I did not want to not exist. Some part of me fought desperately to survive. If I was a lesser part that settled for criticism rather than oblivion. I would have liked for Carlos and Don Juan to have taken time to evaluate my progress or even lack of progress, but they always passed me in the corridors without saying a word. "Let go," Zulika said. "Let go of everything. Just let go." "Why must I?" I said stubbornly. "So that the energy waves from eternity can tumble you into other realms. They can't reach you if you shield yourself with yourself. Only if you are invisible can the waves affect your entire energy body directly." Something in me still fought the idea of being invisible. "Let go of your crappy self," Zulika snapped. I heard her say that over and over, and as she kept saying it, something in me began to give up. I started letting go, although of what I didn't know. But I kept letting go more and more until I became fluffy, like a giant pillow. And when that pillow dissolved, I became a tiny dot, lost somewhere in the black vastness. And then I lost awareness of being a dot, and I was nothing. "Cross over," a voice said. "Let the energy waves of the universe push you over to the other side, to the world where we are." I followed the voice and heard it talk of a parallel universe almost identical to ours that existed behind a barrier. That barrier was made up of our concerns, our ideas of reality, our energetic affiliation to everyday life, and fundamentally to ourselves. Then I heard the voice of Nelida repeating what she had told me seemingly long ago, how not even the body is ours to keep, that the essence of life is borrowed, not ours to cling to. The essence of life is fluid, and our awareness must be also fluid to move with it, or it is forever scattered in the fragmentation of the world into which we were born. But that there is a way out, and that is to let go and be nothing. I opened my eyes and saw that I was still sitting on the bench by the pond. But instead of Zulika, Emilito was there, staring at me. So was Carlos and Don Juan, Nelida, and other people milling about the patio. Food had been set out on a sideboard. I was in the midst of a party going full force. People were having a lively discussion. They were comparing descriptions of their travels, of the things they had seen in the twin universe, as they called it. There is a pope, but he isn't celibate, Carlos said. He has a fat and loud-mouthed wife. Ah, but does he live in Rome? Don Juan asked cryptically. He seemed to be more relaxed than usual, almost jovial. Carlos thought for a moment, as if it were a trick question. I have seen the most exquisite grove of trees, Emilito interrupted. They are dark and green and enormous. Excellent for tree climbing. I have talked to many people. They are healthy and vital, but totally close-minded, Don Juan added. They are unable to imagine or speculate. All their behavior is ritualistic, compulsive, and governed by rules. Their language is fascinating, Carlos continued. The fundamental unit is not the phenom based on sound, but a syntactical structural element. Their brains directly impinge on one another in the form of an agreed-upon structural framework governed by rules of syntax. I have seen a typewriter that writes with syllables, prefixes, and suffixes instead of letters. Each key is practically a word in itself, Don Juan said. That's something for Taisha to explore. I became very excited upon hearing about such a machine. I wanted to know more about it, but other people contributed their descriptions of discoveries they had made about that world. I learned that the people there had a periodic table of chemical elements, but instead of having the usual 52 elements, their world had 76 elements, and some of them were not the same as the ones in our world. There are some animals that are very strange, Don Vicente said, and very unusual plants I had never encountered before. Much of the knowledge for curing comes from this world. I had a moment of sudden inspiration. You're talking about the realm of the invisible people of the Monte, I said. You mean the Yaqui Indians are right. There really is such a world parallel to our own, and magical plants and animals really do exist. Don Juan nodded. The sad part is, however, that for the Yaqui Indians, the realm of the invisible is now only a myth. They can catch glimpses of it, but they cannot enter it with the totality of themselves. So for them, it must remain only a part of their mythology. Why is that? I asked. Their everyday world has become too real and all-encompassing for them, Don Juan explained. The door has been sealed shut by a barrier of human concern that they cannot penetrate. However, it was not always like this. But now the Western world has impinged on the Yaqui so powerfully that for them, that door remains forever sealed. All they can do is to relate stories of that world and tell tales of magic and wonder from a bygone time. I looked around for Zulika, but she was nowhere in sight. Then I noticed that my surroundings looked somehow different. Although we were in the same house, it was not the same. It looked more like the patio and house did after a long session of gazing at the stones and walls. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I realized the tiles were not exactly square. They were rhomboid, and there was an ever so slight tilt to the floor and walls. If I had my leveler and plumb line with me, I could have determined their distance from true, for certain. As it was, they seemed to be shifting as they did after my sessions of gazing. The tiles were shiny and vibrated, causing their shapes to alter ever so slightly. The roof beams of the corridor were not parallel as they should have been. And then I noticed that the trees were different too. Larger, fuller, their foliage more dense. And while I was at it, I noticed the people in the patio. They looked pristine, pure, empty, as if they had form, but no substance. Emilito stared at me the way Zulika had done, whenever I was totally preoccupied with something in order to gain my attention. Then I saw him wink at me and nod his head. Suddenly I knew what his secret was. The mysteries he had wanted to reveal to me when I had enough energy to comprehend it. Now I grasped it without having him tell me. He was Zulika's dreaming body. That was the reason why Zulika wasn't there, in the room. Emilito nodded silently, waiting for me to finish with my bubbling realizations. I knew also that if that was so, then I too was in my dreaming body, and so was everyone in the room, and that was why they seemed so sparkling. What's more, the house, the bench, the tables, the food that had been set out in the patio, all were part of another world. I had crossed over into the twin world without even realizing it. And that meant that the discoveries that everyone had been sharing were not about some inaccessible, distant dream world, but about the very reality which we were now inhabiting. The minute I realized this, Emilito said, "That's right, Taisha. I am the other side of Zulika, and you are your dream body, the other side of yourself. You have used the energetic wave from the universe to cross over to the parallel world, the one that exists next to our own." I pinched myself to see if it was real, and seemed to be as solid as could be, given my state of excitation and ebullience upon realizing where I was. We are in another braid of the universe, Emilito explained. The one overlapping with the world of everyday life, made up of the same energy, only slightly different. Now you know what it means to become invisible, and what it is like to be stalking with the double, and why we always stress sobriety and control. Without control, awareness is dispersed. You can do without the self of everyday life, but you can't do without sobriety and clarity. Awareness must remain intact, no matter where you find yourself, so that you can continue to perceive. I embraced Emilito and thanked him for all his help. To my surprise, he seemed to be solid, and yet he wasn't. For we encompassed volumes of space, like two gigantic pillows embracing. But the reason I could grasp him was because I too was billowy and without substance. But how is it possible that you are a man when Zulika is a woman? I asked. My dream body is not that of a man. I touched myself quickly to see if what I was saying was true. The Nawal Julian taught us how to move our assemblage points to the position of a man, Emilito explained. It was an extraordinary challenge to be male, and I took it. It's so tiresome to have a hole between your legs, he added with an exaggerated sigh. It leads to all sorts of outlandish behavior. Everyone laughed in agreement, especially the female members of the group. Then I saw Carlos signaling me to come over to him. I realized I had known him forever, and now I knew where it was that we had met. It was not in the anthropology department of the university, as I had first thought, but it was here in the twin world, which I had visited often. We had done many things on this side, things that were too inconceivable from the point of view of the everyday world. Then I saw a young woman about my age. She was blonde, had blue eyes, and was petite and very pretty. Her name was Florinda, and she was the ward of the older women, with the same name, who was Nelida's counterpart. You and I are sisters, I said, embracing her affectionately, for I recognized her from other encounters, although I could not remember them in detail. Remember each other well, Don Juan said, because you'll meet again in the world of everyday life, and will have forgotten that you knew each other. You will have to reconstruct this feeling of unbiased affection from scratch. The Nawal woman, Carol, whom I remembered seeing before, was there too. She was the young woman who had given Carlos the bread in the bakery in Hermosillo. But I already knew her. She had helped hoist me up into the treehouse and had looked after me while I was unconscious for 3 days and 2 nights. And we will also meet again on the other side, she said, lisping a bit on the word side. But we won't forget. We'll always remember that we loved each other. And she embraced me with such a genuine affection, that an overwhelming emotion enveloped me, and I knew we were tied to each other forever, across universes. Don Juan stood, the 3 of us around Carlos, and moved our heads together so that they touched. He told us that his task was to make certain through all our training that our assemblage points would be in the same position. And even though our assemblage points would be constantly displaced throughout our training, they would move at the same rate and in the same direction, so that the 4 of us would function as a single unit and be able to amalgamate a consistent reality that we shared. For some time, Carol will have to stay on this side with us, he went on. But you will not really be separated. The bond of energy set up in this world will hold across the boundaries between the twin universes. You only have to be silent and abandon yourself to know where each of the other is. I knew what he meant, but I also became frightened. From experience, it was evident that the universe was vast and one could easily get lost. I also was aware of my tendency to indulge in self-obsessions and in struggles for independence, which could only set up barriers and block the energy holding us together. The most dangerous part was that we would meet again in the world of human affairs, where our power would be minimal, diminished by the concerns of daily life and the absence of Don Juan and the energy of his sorcerer group. We would be operating on a low level of awareness, colored by the massive interference of the bulk of humanity with their own obsessions and concerns. Florinda will be your companion and act as your counterbalance, Don Juan said. She'll see to it that you don't indulge too much. If you do, she will be at your throat like a ferocious jaguar. Florinda let out a growl and clicked her teeth together repeatedly in a biting motion. Everyone laughed. Better watch out, or she'll be at your throat, Don Juan warned. And I will never be at your throat, Carol said soothingly. Listen to Florinda. She is more sober than you. The two of you will flank the new Nawal and journey with him, perfecting yourselves until Carol Tiggs returns. When will she come back? I asked. Only power can decide that, Don Juan replied, and your impeccability. He paused for a moment. If you want to see your loved one again, be impeccable. Do your recapitulation and don't think about yourselves. Carol gave us a wistful smile, urging us on. I'm counting on you, Taisha, she whispered so no one could hear. You will pull me and I will pull you. Agreed? I nodded, but wordlessly asked, how? She showed me her left hand. She was wearing a gold and diamond ring that looked like a tiny monstrance. She told me to gaze at it for a moment and to remember it always, because one day she would give it to me as a sign that we had been together before. In the world of everyday life, it is easy to forget, she said. Tokens of proof are always welcome. I'll never forget, I swore, embracing her. I'll pull you with my affection. This afternoon, you have enough energy to grasp the truth of the twin universe as a bona fide realm of existence, Don Juan said. But it's not that easy to cross over with your body. You can catch glimpses of it in dreams, but to come here with the totality of yourself takes years of training and storing energy. And even then, there are countless obstacles and no guarantees. Then I won't go back, I said. I'll stay here with all of you. That's not possible, he said sternly. You have to perfect yourself in the world of human beings. You have to begin from that point and journey here. Why? Because that is where the bulk of your energy is rooted. Besides, there is no advantage of being on this side. A stalker must be fluid so that you can move anywhere. You must be at ease and impeccable no matter where you are, in this world or in the one in which you live, or in any other place in the infinite band of possibilities that makes us sentient beings. Leave the self behind and you can go anywhere, Carol said. Your task is to dissolve everything that makes a human being grounded in the world of human beings. Then I'll leave everything here, I said. Don Juan smiled. He advised me that while we were in the everyday world, all the energy gleamed from recapitulating and impeccable actions would be able to cross over to be stored here with them. Carol would remain to act as a beacon and to help consolidate our double. The more impeccable we were, and the less emphasis we placed on our personal selves, the more we would strengthen our other side, our energy body. You will be like squirrels gathering nuts for the winter, Carol said. Your energetic selves will get stronger and more concise until one day you'll be able to tip the scales and find the entirety of your being on this side with nothing left for the world of the human apes. That day, she said, we would become invisible to the human eye, and we would consolidate the totality of ourselves on the other side. It was all crystal clear. I knew now the importance of the sorcerer's training. The recapitulation was to rid oneself of one's remembered past and to release one's trapped energy. Losing self-importance prevented one from placing undue energy on the fabricated social self, thereby making it into a permanent feature. The sorcery passes enable one to dissolve the solidity of one's body and purify it energetically. Losing personal history frees one from the compulsion of relating oneself to a single mode of being and prevents us from being pinned down by others with their thoughts and expectations. To test one's progress and transformation, sorcerers use petty tyrants they find in their daily world. In this way, they make certain that change isn't merely an ideal, but an actual bodily metamorphosis on a fundamental energetic level. By regarding the world as controlled folly, a stalker is assured of not becoming entangled with human concerns. Only in this way can one liberate enough energy and become fluid to move with one's body into the twin world. Quieting the internal dialogue through the gazing techniques has a triple purpose. First, it blocks the reinforcement and affirmations we constantly give ourselves that the world is such and such. Second, it enables us to store the energy needed to make the crossing. Third, and finally, it creates an opening in our energetic bodies so that the waves from the universe can tumble us over to the other side. I thought of what Zulika had said about letting go and becoming invisible. Now I knew why everything that is human had to be abandoned. Sorcerers utilize the same methods as do the phenomenologists, such as suspending judgment, questioning the taken-for-granted aspects of space and time. But sorcerers do not merely describe phenomena, but are able to actually transcend reality. Reality is constituted by the existence and condition of our sense apparatus that enable us to perceive the world. Sorcerers, by deliberately and consistently enhancing that capacity for perception through storing energy, liberate themselves from the imprisonment of a single mode of being. Sorcery is really the capacity to perceive more than the average person. Taisha is philosophizing, even in this twin world, Emilito said out loud. Let her conceptualize and speculate all she wants, Don Juan said. Someday she will be able to live her realizations. Besides, it means she and Carlos will get along famously. We all know how he is given to analysis and conceptual interpretations. Like the Nahual Elias before us, Emilito said. Don Juan nodded. Well, then let Taisha speculate on this, Emilito said. The here and there of the treehouse. I turned to face him. His eyes were glowing with the excitement of a revelation. With a nodding of his head, he coaxed me to think about it. I was at a loss as to what he was referring to. Living in the treehouse gave you a different perspective on here and there, he said. I don't know what you mean. There was no horizon in your world, he said, bringing his face so close to mine that his features became blurred. It dawned on me then that half of Clara's house, the grounds at the front part of her place, including the giant trees and the treehouse, had all existed in the twin world. I had already spent many months of my training on this side. No wonder Emilito had insisted that I recapitulate again, saying I had to do it several times for there were many layers of existence to break through. I had to do it once with my everyday body, and again with the double. What's more, Emilito was right. My extended stay in the treehouse and the trees had altered the relationship between my body and the ground. My assemblage point, or center for organizing perception, had been displaced to another point on my energetic body, thereby enabling me to experience different spatial and temporal relationships. Now that I focused my attention on it, I remembered that the foliage of many of the trees was so thick that the sky as well as the horizon were completely obscured. Perception of the world in the trees was not laid out in terms of distant and close space. Rather, everything was immediate, intimately related to my body. It was a superb training to expand the limits of my awareness of space. The more I climbed the trees, the more fluid my assemblage point became, until I could swing from branch to branch, feeling no separation between myself and my surroundings. It gave me a new perspective on the world, totally different from the one I had while I was on the ground. In order to climb the trees, I had to match my physicality with that of the branches and leaves. My entire existence was determined by the here and now. for any distraction could have caused a loss of balance and a fall to my death. At any given moment, all of me was focused on a specific concern, that of maneuvering through the branches. Past, future, and the far away had all merged into a single point, the immediate now, which was governed by my particular task at hand. I had dissolved my old mode of being in the world through my first recapitulation in the cave, and I had incorporated a new one, that of a tree dweller, by never leaving the trees. I experienced a new bodily solidity that at times would express itself in an intense feeling of claustrophobia. I could dispel this by either merging with the trees energetically or by creating a new experience of space or time, in which case my body had to dissolve the branches around me and move beyond them. I did this through a second recapitulation, which expanded my temporal horizon, and through practicing the bodily movements Emelito would periodically show me from the ground, which expanded my spatial horizon. You recapitulated in the trees, practiced dreaming and intending in the trees, and even were able to do movements outside the trees, leaping with your energetic body into a different realm. Emelito reminded me. All this is stalking with the double. It was made possible by abandoning the memory of the limits of the physical self. You moved from the trees to another reality, Don Juan said, a realm which is inaccessible from the world of everyday life. You used intending to catapult you from one braid of the universe to another. Now you know what we mean when we say that intending is the wings that carry a sorcerer across the span of eternity. Soon my party will be leaving on those wings, but we will meet again, somewhere in the folds of dreaming, and from there, catapult ourselves to freedom. I wanted to ask him when and where they would be going, and more specifically, how we would catapult ourselves to freedom. But my dreaming energy was waning. I knew I would be waking up soon in the world of everyday life. And there, I would forget most of what had transpired here. It would be like a vivid dream, fragmented for a short while. Then it would fade and merge with the dense fog that separated the twin universes. I have to go now, I said. I don't suppose you could keep me here with you. No, Don Juan said firmly. If you come, it will have to be on the wings of intent, blown by your own fluidity. I thought of Nelida's advice of always saying goodbye to each moment because it would never again return. She caught the drift of my thoughts. Impeccability is saying hello, thank you, and goodbye, all in one moment, through your superb actions, she said as she embraced me. That way you will always be at ease, with no regrets, and with nothing pending. I nodded. It summed up everything I felt in a nutshell, so that nothing more needed to be said. I looked at everyone, trying to incorporate them in my gazing memory before they faded into the fog. I woke up, gradually becoming solid again. I was laying in my bed in Zulika's house, numb and disoriented. And then I remembered bits and pieces of a giant mosaic. I knew that another world existed, a world that was as real as the one I had learned to call my own. I knew that I was nothing, that whatever I thought I was is a fabrication, a temporary consolidation of components held together by a force for some effect. But it could never be taken for real. There was another reality, parallel to our own, and it too wasn't real. The position of our assemblage points was everything. It's amalgamated, worlds upon worlds, and enabled us to experience them as our world, as the world. The world of everyday life was only one perceptual possibility out of an infinite number of possibilities that make up existence. The stalker's training is to be fluid, invisible without attachment to self and things, so that one could shift back and forth at ease without losing energy or getting lost. Living in the world of everyday life was like being a student in a class. I had to give a good presentation. I had to appear that I knew what I was talking about, that I meant what I said. I needed to strive for order and coherence. But when the class was over, whatever was said meant nothing. It was only an orderly structure created for that moment and not meant to ever be taken seriously as something real or believable. It was an exercise which had to be discarded when the need was over so that one could move on in a never-ending journey. So it was with the twin reality. It was made up of people and animals and vegetation, just like our world, only different. The grove of trees in Clara's house, the tree house, Emilito and myself all had been part of the twin world. I realized I had spent entire stretches of time there without even knowing it. I had been able to enter it under the power of Don Juan and his group of sorcerers who trained me. He and his group of sorcerers, through a lifetime of training, stored enough energy to cross back and forth without losing their awareness, their control, and sobriety. With training, I too would be able to make the great crossing and have enough energy not only to perceive the twin world, but to hold that position of the assemblage point long enough to remember it in detail. And with added energy to be able to describe the place and the path so that the listener on the other side would be able to comprehend them and perhaps even to make that journey himself. Carlos came into the room where I had awoken. He examined my eyes to see if I was myself again and nodded, satisfied. He told me to go get my things together, for we were returning to Los Angeles. A new academic year would be starting soon, and it would not be auspicious to miss the first day of classes. Editor's note. This text is a best effort to produce a finished version of Taisha Abelar's unpublished manuscript that can currently be found at archive.org. Any and all changes made were intended to further enhance the manuscript, and, as such, changes from the original scan have been minimized and focused on giving this book the same professional demeanor of the published works of Carlos Castaneda, Taisha Abelar, and Florinda Donner Grau. No ownership or recognition for helping Taisha get this puppy across the finish line is needed or desired. Thank you, Taisha. The apocryphal history of this work, which has been highly anticipated by Castaneda and Abelar fans and followers for decades now, is almost entirely outside of the scope of this commentary. However, apparently the unpublished manuscript was disseminated to a woman trainee in workshops and private classes starting in 1996, just before Carlos went on his definitive journey. Years later, a typewritten copy made its way under a scanner, and thus we have a scanned PDF file. To my untrained eyes, the original manuscript appears to have been a work in progress at the time when work on this manuscript stopped. In the original scan, I found that a page is missing, which unfortunately we will just have to live with. The page would have been numbered 150 in the original manuscript. In addition, the original scan has 2 chapter 15s, 16s, and 17s that are roughly all of the same length. However, they all have unique content, so I chose to retain them all and keep them in the order I found them and renumber them in the order that they appeared in the original scan. The end.